Since the massacres of October the 7th, Israel has been hard hit by more than 20,000 rockets and drones. People often ask me, what can I do to help? Well, I wholeheartedly recommend the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews.
With hundreds of homes ruined or destroyed, the fellowship is on the ground, bringing emergency food to the elderly in urgent need.
It's time that God-fearing people stand with our Jewish friends, have some hot food, and respond to God's calling on all our lives.
Joining us now is Speaker Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, great to see you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Charlie, it's always great to be with you, and you do an amazing job.
Well, thank you. It's hard to keep up with the pace of this administration. I kind of want to start with that, Mr. Speaker. I mean, you're a historian. You've lived through and worked with several presidents. This is remarkable. Have we seen anything like this in American history?
No, I don't think so. I think if you date it from the 7th of November, after it was clear he was going to be a president, all the way up through the first month, and I'm writing on this this Friday at Gingrich 360, there is a speed, a comprehensiveness, a clarity of what he's doing, which is extended through his whole team. If you look at who he's been picking for key jobs, starting with Vice President Vance, he has a clear sense of the entrepreneurial energy and drive and toughness that he wants throughout the whole government, and of the kind of America that he thinks we have to become if we're going to be great again. So I've never seen anything like it. I think if he can continue it for 4 years, and if he can win the 2026 election, then I think he's going to be in a league just below Washington and Lincoln, and maybe slightly above Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who created a majority that lasted for 90 years. I mean, Trump is doing stuff I wouldn't have thought possible.
And what do you attribute that to? Because the first term, by this time in the first term, we had national security advisors resigning. We had the FBI spying. We had Russiagate. We had James Comey. We had Mueller on the horizon. Trump is permanently on offense, and the Democrat opposition looks weak, disorganized, disunified, dispirited. Why?
Well, I think historians will look back and say the greatest mistake the left ever made was taking the election away from Trump in 2020. Because what it did is it allowed him to spend 4 years thinking about what had gone wrong, thinking about lessons he'd learned as president. And at the same time, the left misunderstood the election, thought they had a mandate to go further and further left, to be truly weird. And the net effect was that you ended up, I think, with a country that was madder, sicker of the left, more ready for change. And thanks in part to the America First Policy Institute and the remarkable work of Linda McMahon and Brooke Rollins, there were some 400 people from the Trump administration who were actively preparing for a second administration. So when he got elected on the 7th of November, they already had, I think, 600 executive orders. They knew what they wanted to do. They knew who they trusted. It was totally different. Remember, in 2016, Trump had never run for public office. There was no Trump organization. MAGA was a movement, but it wasn't a structure. Now MAGA, all across America, there are huge numbers of people who think of themselves as MAGA and who are prepared to go out and work and help elect candidates who belong to make America great again. A totally different world than the world of 2016.
And there's real infrastructure behind it. Mr. Speaker, I now want to talk about how President Trump is reformulating Western alliances. J.D. Vance was in Munich last week and gave an exceptional speech that was then immediately condemned by the Germans. How do you think about this geopolitically? The Europeans seem entitled to unlimited amounts of U.S. taxpayer money without them contributing. President Trump is doing this in a very thoughtful way. What is your take?
Well, I just did a newsletter for Gingrich 360. And my background, I'm a PhD in European history. I've lived in France, Germany, Belgium, and Rome. So I have some general interest in Europe. I think what J.D. Vance did is sort of like your next door neighbor being an alcoholic, and you go over and you do an intervention. He went to the Europeans, and what I think was an intervention. Their system is failing. Their elites are so isolated from the world, yes, and so isolated from their own people that they maintain power by cheating every day. And Vance, it's a very courageous speech. He actually made two speeches, one in Paris on artificial intelligence, and then the speech at Munich. And they both had a similar pattern. I just did some numbers a while ago. There are $15 trillion companies that are American, 4 that are Chinese, and then Saudi Aramco. There are no European companies that are trillion-dollar companies. Well, the Europeans chose regulation rather than innovation, and it's now destroying the continent.
And they're a husk of their former selves. Do you think that? So let's talk about some of the domestic political issues in Europe. J.D. Vance made it a point saying, not only are you guys, embracing regulation and strangulated, laws against your business, but also they are cracking down on freedom of speech. I mean, in Germany, there was this extraordinary piece of tape on 60 Minutes this last weekend where they said, you can't insult somebody online. You're not allowed to say, get out of my country. This is considered to be hate speech. Why should we as Americans continually subsidize that?
Well, we shouldn't. And it's actually quite ironic. The Weimar Republic, which people always say, well, that's what free speech gets you to. The Weimar Republic had very strict laws. There are 200 legal actions against the Nazis. Hitler at one point is barred from speaking in Bavaria. So it's not like the Weimar Republic was this wonderful world of free speech. In fact, they were trying to find ways to restrict communists and to restrict Nazis. And in the long run, it failed. But it failed because the economy failed, because the world had failed from the standpoint of the average everyday German. These rules in Europe, and Britain, by the way, in some ways is the worst. I mean, the British have had a grooming crisis of Pakistani males raping young girls and nothing being done, because if you report it, it's considered Islamophobia. So the parents get in trouble for trying to protect their 13 or 14-year-old girl. I mean, this stuff is crazy. And of course, the American elites, who are all still in a state of shock from the election. I mean, the performance on CBS the other morning with Marco Rubio was a disgrace, and the moderator should be fired for pure incompetence. The things she said are just false. And I think this is a real crisis. The 60 Minutes speech is pure propaganda. And of course, what you've seen is, as Jim Clifton at Gallup told me the other day, for the first time, the news media now ranks below Congress as an institution people don't trust. And as a general rule now, I think the average American knows that if you're watching CBS or NBC or ABC, or you're reading the New York Times, the Washington Post, it's probably a lie. It's probably fake.
And it's sad because we deserve better media than what the American people have been receiving.
Well, look,
right now,
I mean, let me just say, you're part of this. I mean, the fact is the country's turning to podcasts. I mean, going on Joe Rogan beat anything that Trump could have gained by going on the old networks in terms of sheer believability and in terms of penetration. You've done the same thing. I think a big part of the rise in younger people supporting Trump comes directly from you. And so in a sense, the old media is killing itself and driving people to places like your podcast.
And we will happily receive them. and we will cheer on their demise. So, Mr. Speaker, right now we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, and Michael Walz in Saudi Arabia. I want to just make a little bit of a side note. First, I do want to make sure we plug Gingrich 360. People should check that out. But can you just add a little color here? Marco Rubio might be the most talented diplomat I've seen in a generation. He seems as if he is just built for diplomacy. He's doing a phenomenal job. Just any thoughts on Marco Rubio before we get into...
I've known Marco since before he was Speaker of the House in Florida. We are old friends. He is a brilliant political leader. He was a great Speaker of the House in Florida. And I think had Trump not overwhelmed him, he would have been a very good president. I think he's very talented. Plus, as somebody with a background as a Cuban American, he has a deep instinct for Latin America. He's thought a great deal about communism because he's dealt with Castro and the Cubans. And I think you're going to find, and he and I chatted about this the other day, he is going to remake the State Department into an institution that actually serves American interests rather than the elitist interests of the sort of Davos world gentry. And I think he does it well. He's articulate. He's smart. He knows an immense amount. I mean, these reporters don't know anything. That's one of the things you have to remember. Not only are they biased, they don't know anything. People like Marco know a great deal. Witkoff, by the way, has been a huge surprise. I know Steve, but I knew him as a realtor. I had no idea his negotiating talents. And of course, we have a great national security advisor with a real record of being realistic about the world. It's going to be interesting to see what they can accomplish in talking with the Russians and trying to get the Russians to understand that the war is over, period. I think that's Trump's position. This war is over. We're now down to details. And I think we'll do what we have to convince Putin that he can't keep fighting.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing these peace talks happening in Saudi Arabia. We have the Mike Walls, Marco Rubio, and the entire team there, Steve Witkoff. If we can get to a end of this Russian-Ukrainian war via negotiations in Saudi Arabia, what does this mean for American foreign policy and hopefully a reorientation towards the menacing rise of China?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's very symbolic that they're not meeting in Europe. I mean, historically, you'd meet probably in Switzerland.
I think that's exactly right.
Think about it. They've gone to Saudi Arabia, which makes the Saudis happy. They have basically taken a step out of the old world, creating a new world. Remember that Saudi Arabia is the first place Trump went when he was elected and sworn in 2017. So he does feel a deep affection for the Crown Prince, and he's trying to get him to sign a peace treaty with Israel. So there's a lot of different things moving here. The sense I get from talking with the president over a number of years, he is increasingly aware, first of all, of the danger of Putin having about 6,000 nuclear weapons, and that nuclear war would be horrifying on a scale that none of us can appreciate. Second, he really, I think, wants to be a peacemaker. I believe personally that his being shot once and almost shot a second time with the sniper who they found at the golf course, I think that had a profound impact on him. And I was reminded, Krista and I did two movies, one about John Paul II called 9 Days That Changed the World, his going back to Poland in 1979, and the other called Ronald Reagan, Rendezvous of Destiny. When Reagan and John Paul meet in 1982, they are comparing notes because they'd both been shot. And they said, why did God spare us? And they decided God had spared them to defeat the Soviet Empire. And they agreed to make basically an alliance to defeat the Soviet Empire. Well, I think in a very similar way, Trump said, this is not hidden, he said in his inaugural address that he believes God spared him to make America great again. And I think that that is about as deep a feeling as you can have. And I think that he believes that part of that is not just here at home, but part of it is trying to make the world a safer and a better place, whether it's in Gaza or Ukraine or a number of other places. You're going to see him, I think, have an impact. So, and he's begun to assemble a team, as you pointed out. When you have somebody as good as Marco Rubio as your Secretary of State, you have a negotiator as effective as Steve Witkoff, and you have a national security advisor as realistic and smart as Mike Waltz. You really have a pretty remarkable team. So Trumpism, if you will, is both having an impact inside the U.S., but it's also having an impact all around the world.
That is so smart. And about a minute and a half remaining. Talk about what this might mean for the breaking up of BRICS. It's a not so subtle way to say, hey, America's convening in Saudi Arabia and Russia. I know you've been doing this whole BRICS thing, but the dollar is going to reign supreme.
If we can pass a tax cut by May or June and have this economy roaring next year and keep the House next year, this administration is going to lead to a boom on such a scale. And this is part of what J.D. Vance talked about in Paris on artificial intelligence, that the United States is just going to pull away from the rest of the planet. I mean, it's not even going to be close. And at that point, the idea of somebody creating an alternative currency is just silly. It won't happen. It can't happen. The dollar will be dominant, certainly for the rest of your life and probably for your grandchildren's life.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time. It's Gingrich360.com. That's Gingrich360.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.